At the edge of the barren desert plain, where the coyote's howl meets the whispering wind, rode a man known simply as Walker Kane, a drifter with the sharp eyes of a hawk and the scars of 1,000 regrets etched into his sun-browned skin. Night had fallen like a curtain over the world, and an unfamiliar chill curled through the shadows. The moon, pale and silent, hovered above like an ancient witness as Kane guided his weary horse through the tall, brittle sagebrush. His past was a collection of broken trails and unspoken losses, a tapestry woven with ghosts he could never outrun. But that night, a far stranger twist of fate awaited him, one that would change his own life and the destiny of another. Somewhere out there, hidden by darkness and fear, was someone whose cry would shatter the stillness of the night. His horse stirred uneasily, ears pricked toward a faint sound that didn't match the rustling of wind or the distant bark of nocturnal animals. It was a sound laden with desperation, a human moan, fragile yet urgent. Kane dismounted with a practiced quietness, sensing in his bones that this was no ordinary call. With each step toward the source, the cries grew more distinct, more pleading. And then, through a curtain of mesquite, he saw her, a woman unlike any he had ever encountered, her skin so pale it seemed to absorb the moonlight itself, her eyes wide with a mixture of pain and fear. She was an albino Apache, an anomaly in the unforgiving lands of the West, stunning yet fragilized by the very sun that kissed these plains with fire. She lay crumpled in the dusty ground, barely conscious, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The scene was surreal, as if painted by a dream too wild to be believed. Kane's heart thudded in his chest with a taut, inexplicable gravity. For reasons he could not yet articulate, he dismounted and approached her without hesitation. He knelt beside her, brushing the dusty hair from her brow, feeling the shock in her thin frame. In that moment, something in him stirred, a deep, unanticipated spark of compassion that refused to be quelled. He unbuckled his coat and gently laid it beneath her head, whispering words she could barely hear. Without knowing why, he made a decision that would forever bind their fates. He lifted her as tenderly as one might cradle a wounded dove and carried her to his horse. The night seemed to hold its breath as he placed her carefully across the saddle. Every muscle in his body protested, every step toward survival was a testament to sheer will. Yet he pressed on. As he rode, the desert's stark beauty seemed to blur into a chiaroscuro of pain and hope. The woman murmured broken words in her native tongue, fragments of memory and fear. He did not know her language, yet in those soft syllables, he heard a plea for life itself. Time marched forward, the moon eclipsed half its glow, and the first sliver of dawn approached like a promise. Hours stretched interminably, yet Walker Kane urged his wounded horse onward, driven by a conviction he could barely explain. Every minute was a battle against the encroaching chill and the fragile thread that kept the woman alive. As the horizon bled its first ray of sun, he crossed the threshold into an isolated Apache settlement, a place where danger and honor tumbled in equal measure. The women of the tribe poured out into the clearing at the sight of this ghostly white figure cradled in Kane's arms. Gasps of shock and then an eerie silence filled the crisp morning air. Rumors of her existence had circulated like windswept dust, whispers of a child born of both mystery and myth. But seeing her there, barely breathing, brought an undeniable sorrow to every heart present. The tribal elders arrived, their faces carved with the weight of wisdom and centuries of survival. They saw the stranger who had come with the dawn and laid their woman in their care. A long silence hung as they laid her on soft blankets and gently tended her wounds with herbs and whispered prayers unknown to Kane. He watched, unsure of his place, yet unable to move. The sun rose fully now, warmth flooding the earth, and with it came a feeling of fragile optimism. At last, a matron stepped forward, the woman's mother, her eyes brimming with a fiery mixture of pain, gratitude, and something deeper still. She looked at Kane with the calm ferocity of one who has spent a lifetime defending her own. Dark tears traced lines down her weathered cheeks, and her voice, when she spoke, trembled like a thunderclap across silent plains. She spoke in soft tones to her people, and then, with a strength that trembled through his bones, she turned to Kane. She said, "You saved her life, and for that, there is no debt greater than life itself." Her gaze was unyielding, and yet there was reverence in her eyes, respect for the man who had walked through darkness to deliver hope. But this was merely the beginning of a story far larger than either of them understood, a tale of honor and legacy that would test the deepest corners of trust, sacrifice, and the price of courage in a land where justice was carved by the sun and etched into the soul of every wanderer who dared to survive. If you're feeling the depth of this story so far, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, you won't want to miss the rest of this breathtaking journey. Your support keeps these epic tales alive. The first rays of sunrise shimmered across the settlement like slow gold spilled upon dust and dawn. Word of what had happened spread like wildfire through the encampment, how Walker Kane had saved the albino Apache woman from certain death in the unforgiving night. Her mother, known among her people as White Feather, paced in quiet vigil beside her daughter, her eyes filled with a swirling tempest of relief and trepidation. She had prayed to the old spirits of their ancestors, imploring them to spare her child's life and guide this stranger who had come to their camp under cover of darkness. And now, as the sun painted the sky in rose and amber, there was an unspoken crossroad in every gaze thrown toward Kane, a question born in silence: what does destiny ask of us now? Though he had saved her life, Kane felt the burden of an unknown debt pressing against his chest like a weight he could not measure. As she breathed softly in sleep, her pale form lying rejuvenated on blankets stitched with symbols of her tribe's greatest mysteries, he stepped back and watched. These people regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and awe, for no outsider had ever dared such a rescue, let alone live to tell the tale. Before the elders could speak, White Feather stood and addressed him with a fierce dignity that was at once beautiful and daunting. She spoke words he could not yet understand, her voice unshakable. The elders conferred among themselves, their faces grave beneath the rising sun. And then at last, slowly, they turned back toward Kane. White Feather's eyes met his, sharp, sober, and unwavering, and she spoke again. In her voice was the echo of old legends and new beginnings. She declared in her native tongue that Kane had earned a place among them, not merely as a guest but as one forever bound to the fate of her family. She spoke of honor, of the sacred bond between those who save life and those whose lives are saved. The elders nodded in solemn agreement, their gazes heavy with the weight of ancestral law. There, before the rising sun, she offered him a gift most profound, ownership of the very land his horse now grazed upon, a modest ranch that sprawled on the edge of the desert horizon. It was land generous to those who respected its brutal beauty, a promise of home for wandering souls who had none left. Kane felt his breath catch in his chest. It seemed an impossible twist of fortune, a gift not sought, yet offered with such quiet grace as to shake his world. He could not help but feel the pull of conflict, a storm beneath the surface of his weathered heart. He had spent years drifting, refusing ties, refusing roots. But now, unmistakably, something inside him shifted. In that moment he glimpsed a life he had long thought lost to him, a life rooted in purpose and connection, beyond the dusty trails of solitude. Yet something deeper, an unseen current beneath the morning's warmth, tugged at Kane's soul. What did this acceptance mean? Why had fate guided him here, into the embrace of this tribe and onto this land that held such sacred promise? White Feather watched him with ancient eyes, her gaze filled with unspoken truths, as though she saw not just the man before her but the entirety of what he could become. And in that gaze, Kane felt the stirrings of something he had never known: belonging. Days passed in rites of gratitude, songs that rose with the dusk and echoed with the heartbeat of the earth, healing herbs and the laughter of children who danced like sunbeams. Through it all, the albino Apache woman, whom they called Morning Star, revived with grace and strength that seemed to radiate from the very spirit of the plains themselves. With each passing sunrise, Kane learned their language, their traditions, their songs. And with every word he spoke, the bond between them deepened. A new way of life unfurled before him like dawn breaking over an endless horizon, a way that no longer demanded he walk alone. But nowhere in all this beauty was there an absence of challenge. As word of Morning Star's miraculous rescue spread beyond the tribal lands into the reaches of the frontier, outsiders with less noble intentions began to circle. Men with greed in their eyes, covetous of land, legend, and the whispers of something extraordinary, drew nearer. Rumors of the pale woman's survival had already reached far and wide. Some believed she was a ghost, others a fabled miracle, and a few believed her spirit could grant fortunes untold. With every rumor, the fringe of danger crept ever closer. One sunrise that glinted light over the high mesas, a band of rough riders arrived at the ranch, tough men coated in dust and ambition. They demanded answers. They wanted land, gold, glory. They saw Kane's acceptance into the tribe not as a bond of honor but as an opportunity for conquest. Their leader, a hardened man with eyes like flint and a voice colder than winter's breath, saw only advantage in what he presumed was weakness. He sneered at the idea that a drifter and a tribe could lay claim to land both powerful and sacred. Kane stood firm, his resolve forged by respect and loyalty as strong as the foundation of the earth beneath him. Beside him stood Morning Star, now healed, strong, and unbowed, her presence like sunrise incarnate. White Feather, dignified and fearless, stood with them as the chorus of the desert wind lifted its song around them. Though tension crackled like lightning against the horizon, Cain knew this was a moment that would define not just his life, but the lives of those who had welcomed him. He looked at the sunrise rimmed in fire and whispered a vow born from all he had learned: no force of greed, intimidation, or fear will tear this peace from us. And so the battle between greed and honor, intrusion and preservation, began to unfold, not merely in words, but in the echo of every brave choice that stood between a wandering soul and the dawn of a new legacy. For in that moment, Cain realized that saving Morning Star was not the end, it was only the beginning of a journey that would test the very core of his spirit. Loved this epic Western tale? Then hit subscribe now and become part of our storytelling family. Every legend deserves an audience, and you're a vital part of this one.